The first time Death waved back, the observation deck went silent except for the sound of an alien choking on recycled air. The Vorani delegates had gathered to witness humanity's initial contact ritual on Station Meridian, a neutral ring where wars were postponed by contract and curiosity paid the docking fees. What they expected was spectacle or surrender, perhaps a demonstration of primitive bravado. What they did not expect was a human named Eli Calder leaning over the rail, grinning like a kid at a parade, and greeting the embodiment of terminal inevitability, as if it were an old neighbor. The thing floating in the docking bay was not metaphor or myth. It was death, registered in the galactic census as a Thanatarch, a species whose mere proximity caused stars to dim and life support systems to reconsider their commitments. Eli raised a hand. Death raised one back. Captain Skrell of the Vorani Collective dropped his translator cube. It bounced, chirped, and translated his whisper anyway. "Why is it smiling?" The cube asked for him, its tone helpfully neutral while its owner's frowns turned an alarming shade of lavender. Around him, biologists clutched tablets, theologians murmured emergency prayers, and a single intern fainted into a recycling chute. Meridian's automated announcements continued cheerfully, informing everyone that docking procedures were proceeding as normal, because the station had never been programmed to contemplate existential terror. Eli Calder was not supposed to be here. He was a logistics engineer, loaned to Meridian to untangle a mess of incompatible freight protocols. He wore grease on his knuckles and a patch on his jacket that read "Ask me about forklifts." When the docking bay alarms had howled and the bay's gravity had softened like a sigh, Eli had been the first to step out of the crowd and the last to look afraid. He tilted his head, studying the Thanatarch's silhouette, which was all angles and shadows and an absence where eyes should be. "Hey," he said, because that was what he said when encountering anything new, from stray cats to malfunctioning AI cores. "You lost?" The Thanatarch's presence tugged at the mind. The Vorani tasted the end of ancestors. The station's plants wilted in protest. Eli felt a chill, the way one does when standing too close to a winter lake, but underneath it was a peculiar calm. His grandmother had once told him that death wasn't an enemy so much as a door with terrible manners. Eli wondered if this door would like a doormat. "Docking controls that way," he added, pointing. "We've got rules. Mostly about not eating people." Death drifted closer, shadows bending around its limbs like obedient pets. The Vorani recoiled. Skrell's aide began drafting a surrender document addressed to whom it may concern, probably Death. Eli did not move. He felt, absurdly, that he was being examined the way he examined shipping manifests, looking for missing fields. The Thanatarch paused, then extended something like a hand. It was cold without temperature, heavy without weight. Eli hesitated only long enough to wipe his palm on his jacket, because his mother had raised him to be polite. He shook. Every sensor on Meridian spiked. The station's AI, Helm, issued a cascade of warnings in 600 languages before settling on English, as if hoping Eli would understand. "Unauthorized contact with Thanatarch entity. Mortality risk, extreme." Eli shrugged, still smiling, because the hand felt lonely. "Name's Eli," he said. "You got one, or should I make something up?" The Thanatarch's response did not arrive as sound. It arrived as a pressure behind the eyes, a suggestion of finality, a ledger of endings. The Vorani screamed as one. Eli blinked, processing, then laughed. "Okay, that's a lot," he said. "Let's start smaller. Coffee? Or do you drink entropy? We've got great entropy." Skrell found his voice somewhere between terror and outrage. "Human," he hissed through the cube. "Step away. That is not a being to fraternize with. It harvests civilizations. It extinguishes suns. He stopped because the Thanatarch tilted its head, mimicking Eli, and something like curiosity rippled through the darkness. The Vorani captain felt the ancient stories of his people curl up and whimper. Eli finally noticed the room. He saw the aliens pressed against the walls, the guards with weapons that would not matter, the diplomats calculating losses. The stakes assembled themselves neatly. If he angered Death, Meridian would become a footnote. If he offended the Vorani, humanity's reputation would crater. If he did nothing, someone else would panic and make it worse. He glanced back at the Thanatarch. "They're scared," he said, because honesty seemed appropriate. "I get it. You're intense." The Thanatarch withdrew its hand. The shadows eased. Somewhere, a plant perked up. The pressure lifted just enough for breathing to resume. Eli felt a strange warmth, like mutual recognition. He remembered nights fixing conveyors alone, talking to machines because someone had to. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "We didn't invite you to scare everyone. But if you're here, we can figure something out. We're good at that. Mostly." Death did not answer with words. It answered by staying. The docking clamps engaged with a sound like a held breath released. Meridian survived another second. Then another. Skrull swallowed, watching the humans stand between the galaxy and its ending, chatting as if the end might appreciate small talk. The Vorani captain understood, with dawning horror and fascination, that the conflict was not whether death would take them. It was whether humanity would befriend it first. Eli adjusted his jacket, feeling the eyes of 1,000 worlds upon him, and wondered when his life had become an anecdote for gods. Somewhere, protocols rewrote themselves. Somewhere else, courage pretended to be foolishness. On Meridian, the lights steadied, the alarms quieted, and history leaned forward, curious to see whether a handshake could change the terms of forever for once, on purpose, and without asking permission from fear or destiny itself. Watching closely. By the time the second alarm failed to sound, everyone realized the problem was no longer death's arrival but death's patience. The Thanatarch remained docked at Meridian, not advancing, not retreating, simply existing with the quiet confidence of something that had never needed permission before. Hours passed. Then days. Eli Calder became, against his will and better judgment, the only person on the station who could stand within 20 meters of the entity without collapsing into existential despair or hysterical laughter. That made him valuable, which was worse than being brave. The Vorani delegation demanded an emergency conclave, their fronts quivering with outrage and terror. Death was not meant to linger. It arrived, it concluded, it left. This one had waved, docked, and now, according to the readings, was curious. Skrull slammed a limb against the table. "Your human has broken a universal constant," he accused the assembled ambassadors. "This thing is observing us. Studying us. That is not its function." The human ambassador, pale but stubborn, replied that humanity had a long tradition of talking to things that weren't supposed to answer back. The vote to evacuate Meridian failed by a single trembling tentacle. Eli did not attend the conclave. He was busy trying to explain a vending machine to Death. The machine had jammed after detecting a Thanatarch-level entropy field and deciding, quite reasonably, that snacks were no longer a priority. Eli crouched beside it, tools spread out, while the shadowed presence loomed behind him like a patient thunderhead. "Okay," Eli muttered. "If I bypass the safety interlock, you might get a protein bar. Or you might accelerate heat death in aisle 7. No pressure." The Thanatarch leaned closer. Eli felt it then, clearer than before, not hunger, not malice, but confusion. It had never stayed long enough anywhere to wonder why things were arranged as they were. The complications began stacking like overdue invoices. Meridian's life support systems degraded under the constant brush with finality. Species sensitive to mortality cycles began experiencing prophetic dreams en masse, clogging the medical bay. Trade routes rerouted around the station, costing billions. Worse, word spread. Other civilizations started asking questions, sending probes, and one particularly militant empire dispatched a fleet with the stated intention of removing the anomaly. Death, it seemed, had friends and enemies, either of which appreciated humanity's casual rapport. Eli felt the pressure building even if he didn't fully grasp the politics. Helm started assigning him mandatory rest periods he ignored. Security shadowed him constantly, weapons useless but comforting. He coped the only way he knew how, by solving smaller problems. He brought Death a chair, then realized how stupid that was and laughed until he cried. The Thanatarch responded by reshaping a nearby shadow into something vaguely seat-like. Eli applauded. See? Teamwork. Their communication evolved into impressions and emotions layered over simple words. Eli learned that the Thanatarch did not have a name in the way humans did. It was a function given awareness, a river that knew it flowed. It did not understand why beings feared it personally. Death was not an executioner. It was a boundary condition. Eli tried to explain birthdays. The Thanatarch showed him a supernova ending a solar system. They both decided that neither analogy fully translated. The militant fleet arrived sooner than expected, bristling with weapons tuned to disrupt existential phenomena. Panic returned with interest. Skrull confronted Eli on the observation deck, fear sharpening his voice. You must tell it to leave, the captain pleaded. If they attack, we all cease. Including you? Eli looked at the approaching ships, then at Death. He felt a familiar frustration, the same one he felt when managers yelled at machines instead of fixing processes. Running won't help, he said slowly. Neither will fighting. We need a workaround. Unconventional solutions were humanity's specialty, though the galaxy rarely appreciated that. Eli proposed something no protocol covered: mediation. Not between species, but between inevitability and choice. He asked Helm to open every channel, broadcast unfiltered. He stood in front of Death again, heart hammering, and spoke to the fleet, to the station, to anyone listening. He did not threaten. He did not beg. He explained. He explained death as he had come to understand it, not a monster, not a god, but a necessary constant that had never been invited to stay for dinner before. The fleet commanders hesitated, weapons hot, doctrine screaming at them to fire. Sensors showed Death unmoved, almost attentive. Eli turned inward, reaching for creativity born of exhaustion. You don't want to end us, he projected to the Thanatarch, hoping the feeling carried. And they don't understand you. Help me show them. The response was not agreement, but willingness. The shadows shifted, and suddenly every viewer across the system felt it, a gentle, undeniable certainty of an ending far in the future, distant enough to allow meaning now. Weapons powered down one by one. The station exhaled. The problem was not solved, but it had changed shape. Death was no longer just a threat, it was a presence with context, and that made everyone uneasy in a new way. Eli slumped against the railing, drained. Skrull stared at the human with something like awe. The stakes had escalated beyond survival. Now the question was whether the galaxy could live knowing Death might listen back, and whether humanity's habit of making friends in dangerous places would save them all, or doom them spectacularly soon. The climax did not begin with an explosion, but with a silence so deep that even Death seemed to hesitate. It rolled across Meridian like a held breath, triggered when the militant fleet's command ship activated its final protocol without warning or consensus. A single commander, convinced that hesitation equaled extinction, overrode every safeguard and fired a weapon never meant to be tested near life. The device was not built to kill Death. It was built to remove the possibility of death by collapsing probability itself, erasing outcomes before they could occur. The galaxy watched as reality bent, and for the first time, Death recoiled. Eli felt it before the sensors screamed. The calm he had grown used to around the Thanatarch shattered into static panic, a sensation like vertigo mixed with grief. The shadows around Death fractured, flickering in and out of existence, and everywhere they vanished, systems failed. Meridian's gravity lurched. Species screamed as their sense of continuity snapped. Eli hit the deck, pain blooming behind his eyes. But he forced himself up because running had never fixed anything he cared about. Hey! He shouted, voice cracking. Stay with me. Don't disappear on me now. The Vorani delegates scattered, their composure finally breaking. Skrull clung to a console, fronts wrapped tight, staring at the impossible sight of Death destabilizing. What have they done? He whispered. They've broken the end. Helm's voice fractured into overlapping alerts, announcing cascading failures, probability storms, temporal inconsistencies. If the weapon completed its cycle, Death would not die. It would unravel, and in doing so, unravel every system built on the assumption that things eventually ended. Immortality by accident was about to become a curse written across the stars. Eli staggered closer to the Thanatarch, every instinct screaming at him to stop. The pressure was unbearable now, not the calm inevitability of before but raw confusion and pain. Death was not meant to be questioned at this level. It was meant to be accepted. Eli reached out anyway, fingers trembling, and pressed his palm against the flickering darkness. He felt endings slip through his grasp like sand. "Listen to me," he said, not sure if he was speaking aloud or thinking so hard it hurt. "They're afraid. I'm afraid. But this isn't the answer." The weapon's field intensified, visible now as a distortion crawling across space, erasing possibilities like a fire eating oxygen. The fleet commander hailed the station, face rigid with fanatic certainty. "Step away from the anomaly," he ordered. "We are saving existence." Eli laughed, a short, broken sound. "You ever try saving a machine by smashing the power grid?" he shot back. "You're not fixing the problem. You're deleting the rules." The Thanatarch surged, not attacking but struggling, trying to fulfill a function that was being forcibly denied. Every being on Meridian felt it then, the terror of a universe without closure. Lives stretched endlessly ahead, meaningless without an edge. Stars burned without release. Pain lingered without mercy. Eli understood in a flash what death had never been able to explain. It was not an enemy. It was a kindness the universe extended so stories could end. He planted his feet, ignoring the alarms screaming about cellular degradation, and did the only thing he could think of. He anchored death. Not with technology or authority, but with choice. He focused on memories. His grandmother's laugh, scraped knuckles, broken machines fixed just enough, friendships formed in break rooms and disasters. He offered them freely, not as tribute but as proof. "You matter," he projected. "You matter because things end. Because we know they do." The Thanatarch responded, not with words but with alignment. The shadow stabilized around Eli, using him as a reference point, a stubborn variable that refused to be erased. The probability field buckled where it touched that certainty, warping instead of collapsing. Helm recalibrated on the fly, feeding energy into the distortion to slow it, buying seconds that felt like years. Skrell watched in disbelief as the humans stood at the center of impossible forces, small and defiant. Eli felt himself burning from the inside out. Anchoring a universal constant was not something a human nervous system was designed for. His vision blurred. His heart stuttered. Still, he held on, speaking softly now, directly to death. "You don't have to go," he said. "But you can't be taken away either. This has to be your choice. Like everything else that matters." The Thanatarch made its choice. Instead of resisting the weapon, it flowed with it, reshaping the collapsing probabilities into a single outcome. The field snapped inward, imploding harmlessly into a null point that winked out of existence. The weapon burned out, its designer's worst fear realized. It had failed completely. Across the fleet, systems went dark. The commander's face vanished mid-command. Meridian stabilized. Gravity returned. Alarms fell silent one by one. Eli collapsed to his knees, hands shaking, breath ragged, but alive. Death loomed over him, whole again, shadows calm and steady. For the first time since its arrival, it projected something unmistakable across the station: gratitude. Not obligation. Not destiny. Thanks. The tension broke like a storm finally passing. Medics rushed in, though none knew what to treat. Skrell approached slowly, reverently, looking from Eli to death and back again. The galaxy had just watched a human argue with inevitability, and win not by force, but by understanding. The biggest challenge had come and gone, and nothing would ever feel simple again. The question was no longer whether they would survive this encounter. It was what kind of universe chose to survive with humanity in it. The aftermath arrived quietly, which unsettled everyone more than the chaos had. Meridian Station did not celebrate. There were no cheers, no declarations of victory, only long corridors filled with beings trying to understand how close they had come to a universe that never learned how to let go. Repairs began automatically, drones humming as if routine maintenance had not just followed the near erasure of endings themselves. Eli Calder lay on a medbay cot, staring at the ceiling, feeling profoundly tired in a way sleep alone could not fix. Death waited outside. Not looming. Not threatening. Waiting. The Vorani doctors argued in whispers about whether Eli was technically alive, temporarily immortal, or something unclassifiable that would require a new form. Eli ignored them. His body hurt, but it was a familiar kind of hurt, the kind that came after fixing something important under bad conditions. When Skrell finally approached the cot, his frowns no longer trembling, Eli smiled weakly. "Good news," Eli said. "Reality still works." Skrell made a sound that might have been laughter in another species. "You spoke to the end of all things," he said softly. "You convinced it to choose." He lowered his head, a gesture of respect that would be recorded and debated for centuries. "The collective owes your people a debt we do not know how to repay." Eli shrugged as much as the monitors would allow. "Buy us a drink sometime. Preferably one that doesn't dissolve steel." Negotiations followed, but they were unlike any the galaxy had seen. Death did not depart immediately, nor did it remain bound to Meridian. Instead, it learned. It began to move more gently through populated regions, lingering just long enough for meaning without inspiring panic. It communicated not with proclamations but impressions, allowing civilizations to feel closure without terror. The change rippled outward. Wars ended sooner. Some did not start at all. Knowing death could listen made shouting less appealing. Humanity became, much to its discomfort, a reference species. The ones who talked to death. The ones who shook its hand and lived. Eli was offered titles, medals, and a position heading an interstellar department that did not exist yet. He declined all of it. "I fix systems," he said. "Big ones, small ones. This one doesn't need me running it." What he did accept was a quiet role as a liaison, not because he wanted power, but because death asked. Their final meeting on Meridian was not dramatic. The observation deck was empty this time, lights dimmed, the stars steady. Death stood beside Eli, shadows thinner now, less oppressive. The sense it projected was no longer pure inevitability but balance. Eli leaned on the railing, hands in his pockets. "So," he said, "this is goodbye?" The response came gently, endings, yes, but not erasure. Eli nodded. "Fair." Death offered him something then, a gift no one else could receive, awareness without fear. Eli felt his own mortality settle back into place, not as a threat but as a promise. He would end. And because of that, everything before would matter. He smiled, unexpectedly emotional. "Thanks," he said, "for listening." Death inclined its head, the same way it had copied him on the first day, and then it was gone, not vanished, not destroyed, simply elsewhere, doing its job with newfound care. Meridian returned to normal life, though normal had shifted. The story spread, embellished and simplified, turning Eli into a legend he would never recognize. He transferred off the station a month later, back to freight lanes and broken loaders. He liked machines that complained honestly. Sometimes, when a system powered down cleanly after years of straying, he felt a familiar calm and wondered if death noticed too. The galaxy learned something uncomfortable but enduring. Inevitability did not have to be cruel, and courage did not have to be loud. Humanity learned that its strangest trait was not violence or endurance, but empathy applied without permission. And Eli Calder learned that making friends with death did not make life smaller. It made it precious. Somewhere beyond charts and sensors, death continued its work, no longer alone in its understanding. And whenever a civilization reached its final chapter with dignity intact, there was a subtle echo of a human voice saying, "Hey," and meaning it.